Hello, hello. So today we're going to talk about plant stings and bites as part of our next topic in emergency care. So today's topic with plant stings and bites, it's important to know that there is a difference between venom and poison. So venom, something is going to bite you. Venom is a bite. And poison is something you ingest. So snakes are not poisonous, snakes are venomous, and plants are poisonous, plants are not venomous. So that sounds like it would be a good, true, false question. Let's start with poisonous plants. So according to Texas A&M, there are over 700 species of North American plants, not plants, plants. And of these plants, you can have the whole plant be poisonous. Part of the plant can be poisonous. It can vary based on the region. So some plants may only be found in the southern part of the United States because they like that heat and humidity. Some plants may need it to be dry, therefore you may only find them in places where there's the desert. So always know the toxicity and how it varies. So region, plant maturity. So some may be only poisonous when they are in little seedlings. Some may have to mature before they become poisonous and toxic. Some may be more toxic when they're older, but are still toxic when they are new sprouts. The weight of the plant, so that kind of goes with maturity, how much is ingested as well. The degree of system absorption. So were we able to catch this poisoning quick enough to induce vomiting or to pump the stomach and or give antidotes? So how much has systemically been absorbed? The integrity of the poison, so meaning the seeds. So seeds that are cracked tend to be more poisonous. So let's just put that out there. Cracked seeds equal more poisonous or more toxic. Something else that may also vary is the system in which the plant toxicity affects. So, for example, the circulatory system or the nervous system. We're going to talk about each subtype and how your patient will present when they ingest a toxin that affects those systems. So know that a plant can affect one system or it can affect many systems. Okay, so we are going to talk first about poisonous plants that affect the circulatory system. You don't need to know every little exact detail of each plant, but have a general idea of how they're going to affect the system. So Latana camara here is the green berries are going to be what causes with ingestion effects on the heart. So slowing the heart, decreasing the squeeze of the heart. It also affects the lungs and the nervous system and can be fatal if not treated right away. Because if we don't have the blood pumping out of the heart adequately, our tissues are not going to oxygenate and perfuse properly. And then our nervous system is going to slow down. So that's going to be a parasympathetic response to the rest of the body as well. But these are typically found in the southern United States or moderate climate. They need plenty of moisture to survive. And then oleander here, with oleander, just the leaves and the branches, and they are extremely poisonous. So I like to think of the movie White Oleander with Michelle Pfeiffer, and they make tea. She makes tea with oleander, and it kills her boyfriend. So it's extremely poisonous. And not only does it affect the heart, but it'll upset the stomach and the GI system, and it can cause death fairly quickly. So just the leaves and the branches. The ingestion of the flower isn't necessarily going to cause poison, but if you mix the leaves in with that as well, then you're going to poison somebody. Okay, the next plant that we are going to talk about is mistletoe here. It's the berries that are fatal from mistletoe. It's fatal to children and adults. So children are more likely to become a victim accidentally to poisoning via plants because, they're playing outside. Kids like to stick things in their mouths. Maybe they're playing, with the treehouse and they're cooking, or they're playing in the garden, and that's just something that is more likely to happen to children. And as we talk about a lot in this class, those that are susceptible to injury um, and having a more severe reaction to things are going to be our grapes and our raisins, our children's and our older adults. But with the same amount of ingestion of berries from mistletoe, it can affect adults just as equally as bad. Rhododendrons are here, and these are also known as laurels and azaleas. They are found in Colorado. All parts of this plant are fatal. They cause respiratory depression because it also affects our CNS, nausea and vomiting, so difficulty breathing. We have pasteurization and coma. So this is nasty, nasty poison when it is ingested. And then potato sprouts, these little sprouts that grow on potatoes. And in the potatoes, it's glucoid alkaloids that cause toxicity. So they release a gas that is inhaled, or if you eat them, too many of them, it's going to cause a parasympathetic like reaction. So the green parts when you peel potatoes, and you can see green underneath, and it's like an immature potato, that's those glucoalkaloids. So ingestion of too much of that, if you have a low, if they're stored where it's warm, and it's bright, those glucoalkaloids are going to be produced faster. So you want to store them in a lower temperature where it's not as bright. Okay, and if you have a lot of potatoes that are stored together, they can produce what's called Solange gas, which is nightshade, because they're part of the nightshade family, and that's going to affect the CNS system, and it's going to cause coma. And that would be, you'd have to have a large amount of potatoes to produce that gas. There was actually an article, it was a few years ago, that they had stored, a family in a rural community had stored a lot of potatoes in their cellar, and they'd been there for so long that they started producing this gas. And one of the children actually went downstairs and they were playing, and it ended up, the child ended up in a coma, and the child ended up dying because of this CNS depression. Okay, let's talk about circulatory poisoning. And it's important to know it's going to depend on how much is ingested. And that's going to affect on the severity and how quickly it occurs as well. Okay, and it's also important to know that when we're talking about circulatory poisoning, we are talking about the vascular tone. And vascular tone is related to directly to our systemic vascular resistance. So it's creating that pressure gradient that our heart has to pump against. So as we know with shock, and we've talked about, your vascular tone can either constrict and we can have hypertension, or normal blood pressure, or it can dilate and relax, and we can have hypotension. So this is going to cause hypotension. And because it's causing hypotension, now there's not that gradient, there's not that resistance that our heart has to beat against. So to create that blood pressure, we're going to be tachycardic. So our patient's going to have tachycardia. And this is going to make the heart work harder. So it's going to increase our oxygen demands for our heart. Okay? It can occur as early as 30 to 50 minutes after ingestion. So it's after ingestion. Okay, and then other signs and symptoms, diaphoresis and cyanosis, right? Our vasculature tone is relaxed. We don't have that pressure. We're not perfusing properly. So this is going to be the initial phase of circulatory shock. And so it's going to be a relative shock, right? We're not actually losing volume. We're dilating, and therefore we're not perfusing. This plant here is sassafras, and sassafras is poisonous at the leaves. You know, we cook with sassafras, but that would be an extract, and that's not poisonous, but the leaves are. Okay, so treating circulatory poison. No antidotes are available. So first is to treat the shock, right? We're going to treat the shock first. So outside the hospital, we're going to put in a shock position. And then as we expand on medical care, we're also going to add warming the patient, and we'll add monitors, right? That's something we should always do in medicine, is make sure the patient's monitored properly, and we're going to medicate and treat hypotension. So to treat our hypotension, we're going to give vasopressors, we're going to give epinephrine, and we're going to add fluids. We want to help decrease the workload on the heart, okay? While we're doing this, we also want to make sure that we're watching the respiratory system. We have to make sure that it's not also a CNS depressant, because remember, poisonous plants can also affect more than one system. So monitoring properly. Monitor SpO2. We're going to monitor end-tidal if possible. We may want to intubate early depending on the patient's presentation and watching their airway. If found early, but the key word here is early, we could induce vomiting or perform a gastric lavage. And that's going to depend on how soon after the ingestion happened the patient is in the ER. Okay, here are some poisonous plants that affect the GI system. Oleander, again, it's going to cause GI upset. Remember, that's just the leaves and the branches. Then we have mistletoe, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. The bulbs of daffodils can cause nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, or it can be fatal. A lot of times when you see GI poisonings in plants, it's going to be kiddos. They're very pretty. There are flowers that are edible, but not all flowers clearly are edible. Poinsettias, the leaves are going to be what's poisonous, but they have more of a fatal effect on animals. Number 5 would be the irises. And irises would be the stems and the roots that grow underground, are going to be the more serious and cause digestive issues. Nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, cramping, just cause lots of nasty things. And I can never say this one. Hyacinthus here, in large quantities can cause stomach cramps, excess salivation, vomiting, and then oak leaves and oak leaves, the foliage, which are leaves, as well as acorns, can affect the kidneys. So, damage to the nephrons, kidney dysfunction, so inability to urinate, and it can take several days to weeks to actually show any signs or symptoms, but a large amount would have to be ingested. So, symptoms of GI poisoning. So, it's a variable time of onset. Um, it's usually around 30 minutes, with the exception of the oak, because that's going to take longer. NVD is nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. And the biggest thing with GI poisonings that we're looking at most of the time is that acid-base balance. Excess vomiting, excess diarrhea, inability for our electrolytes to be managed as well. So we can have hypotension because we're losing volume. So that would be something we have to make sure that we're treating with fluid. No antidotes. If we find it early, again, it would have to be early. We can induce vomiting or gastric lavage. We want to treat dehydration and palliative care if it's unable to be reversed or we don't catch it in time. But we want to be aware of vomiting and diarrhea because that electrolyte imbalance and then electrolyte imbalance and hypotension can lead to a metabolic shock. So we want to make sure that we're treating the symptoms as quickly as possible. Okay, moving on to plants that affect the CNS, which is the brain and spinal cord. Okay, so apple seeds are going to be poisonous, apricot pits, Carolina jasmine, cherry pits, daffodils, the bulbs. Marijuana, that's why you get the effect that you get when you ingest marijuana, because it's affecting your central nervous system. That's what gives you that Rocky Mountain high. But respiratory depression is rare, with the exception of ingesting large amounts. That being said, there are cases, it's usually with kiddos that get maybe a hold of edibles, or somebody who takes too many edibles that can have a respiratory depression. They're just going to have shallow breathing and a decreased respiratory rate. And it's typically mostly pits and seeds of all these plants that are going to give us that depression. With marijuana, it's going to be the flower of the plant. Peach pits and oleander as well. Okay, let's talk about symptoms of central nervous system poisoning. So depression of the respiratory system and the cardiac system. So a decrease. So bradycardia and you can have hyperactivity of the brain as well. Hallucinations could be another symptom of poisoning, like ingesting mushrooms, magic mushrooms that are poisonous. You could have altered level of consciousness, so lethargy. If you've ever been around someone that's really, really stoned, they're kind of slow to react and, maybe get the giggles. So altered level of consciousness. You can have stupor. So somebody's talking to you and then all of a sudden they don't make any sense or they can't focus. Those are all going to be an altered level of consciousness. And coma is possible depending on the severity and how much they ingested. This is a big key point right here. If your patient has an altered level of consciousness, we don't want to induce vomiting, right? Because they're going to have a harder time protecting their airway and they are a bigger aspiration risk. BLS, if indicated, right? So BLS, they don't have a pulse. You check a pulse, they're no longer responsive. BLS may be indicated. Intubation and ventilation if they cannot protect their airway. Or if a patient has vomited and they have an altered level of consciousness, we're going to intubate because they're a huge aspiration risk cardiac stimulants. So we are going to give cardiac drugs that are going to increase the rate. So those are going to be chronotropic, or we can give inotropic, which is going to increase squeeze. And we can have, like Derek said, positive or negative. Okay. And same with chronotropic. So, but in this case, we're going to give stimulants. So we're going to increase it because they're going to be depressed. Hypotension medications, so vasopressors. Epi fluids. Okay. We are going to move from plants to bugs. We're going to talk about bees. We're going to talk about wasps, scorpions, and spiders. So in this video, we are going to talk about bees, wasps, and scorpions. And then in video 2 we'll start off with our spiders. Okay, let's talk about our bees and our wasps. So bees and wasps actually cause more fatalities than snake bites. Bees only sting once, so know the difference between a bee sting and a wasp sting. Bees will leave their stinger in. Because the muscle that pushes out the stinger or the venom pushes the stinger out. So you can see in this cool picture here that's the venom, and the muscle that pushes out that venom also pushes out the stinger. It also has a little barb on the end of the stinger, and that's what causes it to stay in. Barbed stinger. Wasps will sting multiple times, and after 3 to 8 stings, the venom runs out. Their stinger is this picture right above where it says wasps here, and it's more like a hypodermic needle, so it's straight. Okay, so wasps have a straight stinger. Wasps cause more fatalities because of anaphylactic reactions, so more fatalities. So if you've heard of Africanized bees, they are typically in the southern part of the United States or in tropical areas. They're more aggressive than regular bees. So they will pursue someone who agitates them for a longer period of time in a mob-like fashion. They are not more venomized or venomous. And they have that mob mentality, so they will swarm and continue to chase somebody or something. So again, it's that barbed stinger that is going to cause the stinger to stay in. So know the difference between bees and wasps. Wasps, again, they sting 3 to 8 times before they run out of venom. So symptoms of a sting, and this can be wasp stings or bee stings, a painful red wheal, swelling, and itching. These are all normal responses. So this is normal. It's okay. This is going to happen. This is what we expect. When we get 10 plus stings, That's when we're going to see nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, because we have this toxin. Our body wants to get it out. A headache, a fever. This is not anaphylaxis. So this is not an anaphylactic reaction. There's no airway involvement here. Less than 5% of Americans have an anaphylaxis response or a hypersensitive reaction. That's when we're going to see our rash. We're going to see those welts, those hives, skin flushing, dizziness because we have massive vasodilation and hypotension, right? We're in shock. Airway swelling, that's going to be our number one concern when we see this reaction. It's always a medical emergency because this is anaphylactic shock. And we need to get a patent airway. Patients should get epi, and we're worried about the airway. Okay, let's talk about treatments for a sting. So we're going to start with a normal reaction. So the first thing we want to do is fast removal of a bee stinger, right? Because bees are the only one that lose their stingers. So a bee stinger here. Venom is injected 2 to 3 minutes after, so we want quicker removal so we have less of that toxin going into systemic circulation. Don't pull it. We want to use something like a credit card and scrape out the stinger. So a flat surface. Don't squeeze, because if you squeeze, that's going to put more toxin into your circulatory system. Ice, so ice is going to help slow absorption. It's also going to help reduce pain and decrease inflammation. Benadryl is going to help that histamine release, especially for somebody who has a hypersensitive reaction. Ibuprofen or acetaminophen, so Tylenol or Advil for pain. A B kit. A B kit's going to be Benadryl and epi for those who have a hypersensitive reaction. Basic CPR for shock reactions, and treat shock airway if present. So bees are actually attracted to CO2. Where do we get rid of through CO2? Our mouth, and our face stings are going to actually be common. So make sure that you are always looking for the site of the stings. Okay, scorpions. There are 2 venomous scorpions in the United States, and we are going to find them in Nevada, New Mexico, and Arizona. I actually have a funny story about scorpions, if there is such a thing. So my ex-mother-in-law lives in Mesquite, Nevada, which is just an hour north of Las Vegas. And we were staying in one of her rental properties because she does real estate. And Marilyn was like 4. She was 4. She was pretty little. And we were out there on vacation. And it was our last day there. And I was in the shower. And you know, when they're really little like that, they follow you everywhere. So I was in the shower and she comes in the bathroom with me. And then all of a sudden she yells, "Mommy, mommy, mommy, there's a monster, there's a monster." And I was like, "There's not a monster." And I look out and it was like a little clear baby scorpion. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, get your dad." And he said the same thing. It's not a monster, it's a scorpion. And he did not believe her. So I'm really glad it was our last day. So we went through all of our clothes and our bags and made sure there were no scorpions in anything. And luckily, nobody got hurt. But that is my scorpion story. So you can tell they're in the southwest areas of the country. So even part of Colorado, the southern part, the Four Corners area, you can see scorpions, but mostly going to be in Nevada, New Mexico, and Arizona. This scorpion here is actually the Arizona bark scorpion. and it's the most venomous, say that 5 times fast, in the United States. It can potentially be fatal, is really going to affect the elderly and children. So our grapes and our raisins are going to have more effects from their venom than a healthy adult. So signs and symptoms. It's important that you recognize the signs and symptoms. So immediate intense pain. And the pain worsens with pressure. So touching it is going to have more pressure. If there's swelling and then there's cloth is restricting it, that's going to create more pain. Standing on it. So like if they get stung in the calf and they put pressure onto that leg, the pain is going to be even more intense and it's going to be immediate. Muscle cramps and twitching, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. You're going to have tissue swelling. So tissue swelling and bruising to the area. So make sure that you can recognize the signs and symptoms if given to you in a scenario. If you said if your patient was in a Las Vegas hospital and they had just been out in the desert doing something, and then they had an intense pain, that should lead you to believe that it's a scorpion sting. So these symptoms are going to be extreme scorpion sting symptoms. The one from the previous slide is what we can expect from a typical sting. So this may be a sting more than once, more than one scorpion, and this is going to be systemic reactions from the neuromuscular system and the autonomic stimulation. So restlessness, they just are hyperactive. The brain is sending all these signals, these efferent signals, and we can't shake a feeling of getting comfortable, and we're very much up and moving around and just anxious. Salivation, so we'll have an increase in saliva production, secretions. Our body wants to get rid of this toxin and it wants to flush it out in a natural way. Dysphagia, visual changes, so it can be blurriness, it can be look like water's running over the eyes. Stridor is going to be imperative that you treat that right away. So think of treatments for stridor. We're nebulizing racemic epinephrine. We're providing cool mist aerosol. We're going to start IV corticosteroids to help reduce that swelling that is causing stridor. We want to make sure that we're keeping an eye on the airway and we're looking for hypotension, right? We're looking for signs of shock. So those are related, right? We're looking for signs of anaphylaxis. We want to make sure we intubate early if needed, right? We're going to give Benadryl. We're going to give antihistamine so that we can help decrease this hypersensitive reaction or all of these cells are showing up. Okay, we're going to look at supraventricular arrhythmias. So above, supra equals above. So supraventricular would be above the heart. So this is going to tell us it's our atria. We're looking for a flutter. We're looking for AFib. It's just that kind of comes where our overstimulation, our restlessness, that SA node is just firing. Okay. If we go through that too long, we're worried about clots, especially in our older patients. We're looking for blood pressure changes, typically hypotension. Fever, the body's natural defense mechanism, right, is still kicking in. Muscle spasms, which can lead to paralysis. And we're worried about the airway. Treating them, we are going to add ice to the site of the sting. That's going to slow the spread of the toxin, of the venom, and it's going to help with pain of that area. Analgesics, so pain meds. Analgesics or pain meds. Oxygen. right? It's never going to hurt having a little bit of oxygen on our patient, because we know that when our body is going through something like this, we're increasing the metabolism of the organs. They're going to have a higher need for oxygen. So even if they're saturating fine right now, it might be a false sense of security. Cardiac monitoring and medication as needed, so vasopressors. Okay, airway management, and then Valium, and this is going to be for muscle spasms. So that can lead to paralysis, right? Because muscle spasms lead to paralysis, because if they continually are spasming and shaking, we're increasing that metabolic rate. And if they get tired and they poop out, then that's going to they're going to stop working. They're not going to be able to meet those demands anymore. Antivenin, if severe, and that's going to be in Arizona only. We're also going to treat hypotension with fluids and pressors. And pressors are going to be for our severe patients who are having hypotension, are going to be having anaphylaxis reactions. If we're managing these steens and our patients alert, awake, and oriented, we're also going to encourage fluid via oral as well. So drinking lots of fluid and giving IVs. So fluids can be IV and oral. Okay, that concludes this part of the lecture. The next lecture, we will be talking about spider bites and snake bites, and I will see you all soon.